Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about interoperability and open source, and obviously talk about the plugin that was mentioned before. Again, Guido Quaroni, I work at Adobe, and I'm responsible for the engineering team and 3D and immersive. When I first start showing a few slides, maybe some of you have seen in the past, and it really talks a little bit about what is the interop strategy that we're trying to push forward at Adobe. Fundamentally, the idea is to make sure that we can have some common representation for data as much as possible, for 3D data, in the form of files, but also, like I said before, it would be cool if we can also one day copy and paste between applications to really simplify, especially for data that is not absolutely complex, like even geometry. It would be awesome to start somewhere. We choose USD as the representation and the format at Adobe among our application, and obviously we're happy to see that that's been chosen also by a bunch of others. And the other one interesting development is that we're looking at USD also to become the data that we actually store on the Creative Cloud. So I'll actually show this is a simple diagram, but conceptually is as you author your 3D data and you're working in multiple platforms, it can be desktop, it can be portable, ultra portable, it can be the web, or even if you're taking pictures or videos. The idea that when you kind of send your data into the cloud, there is going to be a USD representation that acts as the ground truth of your asset. So it may be a full-formed USD file. It can be a USD file that maybe points to a GLTF if you upload a GLTF. And then in the cloud, there will be processes that will make, we call it rendition. So you will have a GLTF and a USDZ of these assets, so you can actually consume it on devices that actually are taking the data as a final consumption. Where we are today, we have support across all the Substance app. One actually also integrated Hydra as a part of their workflow. And we have Illustrator that save a USD file, and After Effects that is looking into 3D more and more. We're talking about how After Effects also one day can import a USD file as well. But today I want to talk about 3 open source, actually not one. I'll talk about obviously the plugin, but I want to mention a couple of others that may be of interest because also are open source initiative that we want to present today. The first one, we call it the connector. And the idea, if you look at the slide before, what it would look like if we had a way to have some mechanism that application can also see each other that are actually running on the same machine and be able to say, I wanted to send this asset to this other software, or I want to send a request for a refresh or an update to another software. And so this is more at early stages, and we're thinking about if this may be something of interest or useful, is having a library with an API to be able to connect application that are running on a machine, and to be able to transfer data as much easy as possible, and both meshes, materials, you name it, something that the application themselves, if they have the ability and the compatibility for that transmission, to initiate it through this mechanism, and to pretty much simplify or also reduce as much as possible the import-export workflow. This is something possible today with the Adobe product. There is a mechanism, we call it the send to be able to send what you're working on to another app. And this is a way to possibly see if it would be useful to have something that more application can actually embrace. So then I can send it to Maya, I can send it to Nuke, and all these other software that maybe actually understand the same data that I'm working on my application. So this is an example. I'm actually working in Sampler. I'm authoring a material. Normally, when you're done with the work, you would actually save the SBAR file that contains the material specification, and then you import this material in a compatible application. In this case, you will have instead, what if a Blender has the plugin installed, and it will say, actually, Blender is active, and you can now interop, and so with a simple click, the material will be sent over, loaded into Blender, and now you can actually do the work. And so this solves the tedious aspect of like saving and loading just for the purpose of interop. This is another example. This is an asset created with photogrammetry, and it's a USDZ file that has geometry and it has textures. And same thing, you may want to just send it over to another app instead of it's only temporarily, so you don't want to save it and load it, and just want to send it over. And this goes to Blender, loads the file, the geometry, and also the material. So this is kind of the basic concept. There is not crazy rocket science behind this, but we would like to engage with some of the other vendors to see what the interest is and what the possibilities are, initiating that conversation. So we push this beyond the Adobe application. So we're doing some testing right now. We want to soon publish the functionality and the associated APIs, gather feedback, and understand the additional requirement. And again, ultimately, if it's something of interest and we believe other companies may want to use this mechanism to integrate in their software or even custom software done in the studios, we want to release an open source Apache 2 pretty permissive license. The second one I want to mention is OpenPBR, and it will have also a connection later on with some of the plugins we want to open source. So OpenPBR was presented a few days ago, and really was, the desire was to get as much as possible creatives to use as many applications as possible. We know that material look differences, and the material is still a problem to tackle. And so we wanted to simplify, we want to keep innovating, and as a plan of action, we said, let's embrace an emerging standard, and that's Material X, and also collaborate with other vendors. And that's how we started this initiative between Autodesk and Adobe, because we had something that was quite similar. And so we said, maybe we shouldn't do yet another one that is not that different. I'm going to show this video. Some of you have already seen it. So the OpenPBR will be part of Material X, and it will be part of the Academy Software Foundation. We thought it was actually much better, much easier to not come up with something different governance. And so we worked with Jonathan on the Material X front to proceed that way. So we're gathering feedback with some list of contributors before we go further into the process. Test and more test, those images, they're similar, but they're not identical. There are things that still to be sorted out. And the idea is to between, we thought, okay, SIGGRAPH, and I was like, well, maybe September. So I'm trying to stay hopeful that by September, at the maximum October, we'll be able to release into the Git repository the specification. Our strategy ultimately at Adobe is going to be Material X, OpenPBR, SBSR for procedural texturing, and USD. And this is also give you an idea in the material space how we plan to integrate SBSR with Material X textures, Material X materials, is by connecting them through plugins. And I will show a little bit about what that means. So let's talk about the 5 format plugins. We've been working for a number of months on these. Some of them actually already shipping in some of the product, especially in modular, when you save an OBJ or some other formats. Internally, the USD representation is made, and then the plugin does the rest of the work. Basically, the idea of having a number of plugins on the boundary. If you have an application that understands USD, you can integrate many third-party 5 formats. We have the one that we're going to open source today. We also have additional ones that use the TechSoft hoops library to import even CAD files, STEP and IGES, etc. And then go through the whole process and all the way to also having plugin to be able to export. So this will allow application to become also a converter if needed. So the plugins that we want to open source for is the SBSR plugin, and here we go, OBJ, STL, PLY, FBX, and GLTF. There may be more coming, but those are the first ones. There are already, some of them are already out there. There's already an FBX open source. There's already a GLTF or 2 open source. So We want to, as soon as we put those out, we want to initiate a conversation to see, because maybe there are better ways to do the same thing between the different plugins and see if we can actually coordinate the work. So we simplify it for everybody. So the SBSR, you can import multiple files. It supports, this is a little bit of a strict requirement. In 2308, it was introduced a mechanism that you can use an attribute to drive those plugins instead of metadata, so it makes it a lot easier to modify things. So this plugin will require the new version of the latest version of USD. And it's going to be built in 2 stages. One is the file format. When you open the file, it creates the description in USD, and it can produce the texture. And the second stage that we're working on it is actually at Hydra time. When you ask for the texture, the system will generate them. And so we think that would be bring additional efficiency, because you're just doing texture generation only at render time. So here is an example. This is still a CPU implementation, but you have a USD file where you can switch a property. I'm switching a parameter. If you look at the body of the character, is going to change a little bit the look. And so the idea that you have this plugin, you open the SBSR, it comes in like a node in USD, and then you can modify the parameter, like in this case, like a frequency or some other material parameter. In this case, also, if you have variation into the SBSR, the variation become variants in USD, so you can switch them. You can switch the resolution of your textures. This is assuming, obviously, pre-render time, and so it's a pretty extensive plugin that really lets you take advantage of the procedural texturing that you can do with the Substance engine. The other 3 that are very similar between each other is OBJ, STL, and PLY. Obviously, they do polygonal meshes. OBJ has been extended to have groups, material assignment, and material specification. And also, they have STL for PLY. They can have binary. Those are fairly simple file format. The OBJ in particular got rewritten to take advantage of some optimization. It has a couple of extra dependencies, but the actual loading time of large OBJs are really much faster. And also, you can read the material. This is compared to what's available on the USD sample directory. FBX and GLTF are a little bit more advanced, supporting obviously meshes, cameras, and materials. And again, we're not completely finished with those, but we have implementation for skeletal animation. And also, this is an interesting one, be able to pick up textures embedded into the files. So you don't have to extract it and put it somewhere. Actually, the plugin through an asset resolver will be able to actually read the texture that are actually embedded. The same way when you open a USDZ with embedded textures, they come in without being sitting in a separate directory. And, oh, here we go, direct texture access. So I'm going to actually play a demo that I just made not too long ago to play with this is a viewer that we are, I would say it's a good-looking USD view that we have internally. And I'm just going to let it go, and you're going to see different file formats coming in. This is, again, an FBX that is being read. This is a Mixamo character that is being saved through the Mixamo portal. You can bring it in. You can actually have the animation, how it was saved. And this is part, obviously, of USD and Hydra. So this viewer, you can also do, you can run a path tracer. So this is FBX, and then, obviously, GLTF. So, I mean, I guess it's probably self-explanatory. So the support is for both skinning and also rigid transformations. And in this case, also, as you can see, there are both GLTF and GLBs. So you can support both when the files are, again, embedded into the file or separately in a separate texture directory. Here we go with the OBJ. So this is the one with, again, capable to bring the texturing from the OBJ. It's really simple, the material specification there. This is actually quite a large file. There is an interesting, that comes in pretty fast compared to this, actually, the fact is OBJ. Here you see actually Z up and Y up. We actually added the ability that the plugin can inform the application to say, well, I'm kind of my format most of the time is ZApp, my format most of the time is YApp. So we added ZApp and YApp conversion into this viewer and recentering, but actually the plugin can do, like for example, PLY, I believe, or STL. One of the two just already said, well, generally my app vector is this one. So we try to help to automatically configure your viewer depending on the file that you're importing. So this is the, here you go. That's the STL automatically picked up the ZApp vector based on the file format. And but I think this is probably the last one. Oh, there's one more, the SBSR. Yeah, same thing like I showed before in USD view. You can bring them in, and it takes a little bit of time because again, it's producing on the fly the texture maps before, and then automatically inject a sample geometry that you can use it for, like your shader ball. And this is the same asset that was exported, and so then you have the same exact asset that in USD obviously exported. Once you have it loaded, obviously into this application is based on USD, so obviously you can export it with the high fidelity. Now, I wanted to make sure that people say, well, this looks like a third-party application. I'm not so sure. So even it takes a little longer to do it, I just went the USD view way to do the same thing. So I loaded the same assets with the same exact plugins. So those will be a standard plugin that will be able to be built. I'll explain a little bit after the video. But the idea that, again, the same exact thing works as it is in USD view. There's some advantage on custom viewer because you can have some parameters. You can customize the input and output, when you import-export the parameters, but in the most simplistic way, they do the same. So this is, I'm trying actually an export of what's loaded, exporting an OBJ through the stage, and then bringing it back in. So this is another ability now when you export also OBJ. It does tries to do the material assignment. It doesn't look exactly the same, but at least the textures are preserved and some information is preserved. So the OBJ that you can make now, they have closer connection. And I'm sure there are lots of little things here and there to be sorted out because these standards also implement. We were looking at FBX Phong shading model, and how do we map it to PBR? There's a big document on the web from Microsoft about how to convert these numbers and all that. So we're trying to think about how we can try to be as much as possible faithful to the original intent when you bring it in from outside. The dependency, again, obviously USD, and depending on if you're using FBX, you need the FBX SDK. There is a bunch of other dependency. OBJ brings a few others because, again, he has that fast parsing of the ASCII file. But the repo can be configured. You can build them all, and it actually look for those libraries if they're not installed. Or you can configure to say, well, I already have the Draco library already installed because I built USD with it. So I want to point to some other location. So you can customize. You'll be able to customize the CMake. So we're in beta. We're doing. We would like to release it in September. Again, some of these plugins are actually already used in the most simplistic form. The geometry was really easy, obviously, to tackle. We're just working on the materials right now, and that's where sometimes we see bugs and problems. And again, same thing, Apache 2.0 license. And that's pretty much it. So we're pretty excited to bring this to the community.
Are there any questions? All the way at the back.
Thank you. So my question is regarding the connector. You showed a picture where you had like several DCCs and everything, and from what I understood, the aim of this plugin is to transfer geometries and materials across the different DCCs. But how does it work if, for example, the two DCCs use a very different material system? Yeah,
that's obviously there are some limitations to what kind of what you can do where as we're looking at the different application, like for the case of Blender, we're saying, okay, what data representation is the closest? Should we make a USD representation with the material and then take advantage of? So we're not actually, we're not really building inside each application the understanding of an Uber system out there. We're trying to this is more about, okay, you can import this kind of data. I can make that kind of data, so I'll do it and I'll signal and you go ahead and import. So if two applications don't have a compatible way to talk to each other because they have schemas and representation that do not map, you can still do this, but obviously you're not going to get the same thing. This is really about simplifying. I mean, the most simplistic of all, the two use cases are really the simple one. You can say, I'm saving a file, and I'm telling you to load it, or I'm changing a file that you're referencing, and I'm telling you the file needs to be reloaded. So we have a lot of cases where people are working in Painter and in other third-party apps, and say, well, I'm working in Painter. I want to save my textures. I would love to be from Painter to says refresh, not even see the painting in real time, but just to do that. And so this would be a very lightweight, simple way to just send a signal to say, okay, you need to just, I'm telling you what textures are dirty, and so please reload them. But again, I'm sure there has to be some denominator here, so there will be a situation where it's not as effective.
Any other questions?
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. So first of all, super cool. Thanks, Guido. I'm wishing we could name the FBX plugin FBX don't use or something like that. It's one of those things where I totally get why it needs to be there, but at the same time, it's almost doing a disservice to the community to saying, like, we want to continue using this stuff when in fact we want to improve USD to not need FBX. So again, not really a question, more of a comment. I don't really know how we do this kind of pre-deprecation of things, but it would be great if we could.
This is back from my experience at Pixar. Every time we try to impose to people doing production, you don't use this and you use that, you almost become like the opposite effect to like, oh really? I'm gonna just use this for this other. And so I feel like the artist should decide, and we wanna make it easy. The point that USD needs to be a better format on its own, and not because the FBX cannot be read anymore. Because if FBX is still doing a good job for certain use cases, and there's not enough justification, the problem is, you know what I mean? So I know it's a tedious, especially when we don't find the mapping. We're talking about the camera schema between the two. I'm like, certain things map, certain don't. So still going through the work, because ultimately people also may have a crazy library of assets, and you just don't want to say the new system is amazing, but throw everything away. So yeah, it's an inevitable thing, I believe. And
so does that mean we'll be able to download USD from Mixamo soon?
Well, at least there is a plugin that you can read the FBX, but yeah, maybe, should be possible. Yeah, but I don't know when. Priorities, you know, as always, like. As you can imagine, in a company that sell third-party software, they're very happy to give things away. But when you say, I need to put engineering on a free thing, and they always say, okay, but so it's more of a prioritization as everything. But the FBX gets read really well. We'll make sure that those come in nicely.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay.
Thank you.
Guido.